Welcome to Oracle Eyes. In the Ukrainian war arena, the Donetsk region is very active, while Kursk is at the forefront of cross-border operations. Throughout this week, Russian forces have been approaching the Ukrainian stronghold at Vuhledar and attempting to increase their pressure on Pokrovsk. However, from Sunday, September 15th, Ukrainian forces stepped up ambush and counterattack operations against Russian forces. As a result of these operations, Russian forces suffered a heavy defeat, losing 46 armored vehicles in a single Ukrainian ambush. So how did this operation of Ukrainian forces take place, and what was the background? We will bring you the latest frontline developments that have plunged the Russian army into deep despair in Pokrovsk, and the new measures the Russian army is taking in the face of this heavy defeat. Before we start, do not forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications and like to support us. The 21st Separate Special Purpose Battalion, 46th Separate Air Transport Brigade and 59th Separate Motorized Infantry Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine conducted a joint operation. The target of the operation was a convoy of armored vehicles of the Russian army heading towards the village of Ostry in the Donetsk region. As a result of the operation, 46 armored vehicles of the Russian army were destroyed. The Hetman Bogdan Khmelnytsky Separate Presidential Brigade published striking footage of the operation on its Telegram channel. The video shows how the Russian column of 46 tanks, armored personnel carriers, and infantry fighting vehicles was stopped by combined artillery fire. Due to the fact that the Russians approached the positions of the Ukrainian defenders in a large column, reconnaissance drone operators were able to detect the enemy in time and prepare to destroy it, the Ukrainians said. Approaching the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine, attack UAV units launched active raids on Russian armored vehicles. The video shows how a massive artillery strike nailed the armored vehicles in place, how the front tanks exploded in seconds. As can be seen from the footage, Ukrainian forces defeated the Russian armored convoy as a result of coordinated operations. Things were indeed not going well for the Russian army in Pokrovsk. The advance towards Pokrovsk has stalled for nearly 2 weeks, and while they have not made any progress, they continue to suffer heavy losses in the sector. Ukraine has moved at least 2 combat-experienced brigades into Pokrovsk this month and has probably increased the supply of ammunition to the brigades fighting in the salient. The results were clear for all to see. The Russian armed forces were halted for 2 weeks after advancing steadily since the fall of Avdiivka on February 17, 2024, and advancing towards Pokrovsk. Having been defeated on the front lines, the situation of the Russian army in the Kursk region is also quite complicated. It has been almost a week since the Russians launched a surprise counter-offensive against Ukrainian positions in Russia's Kursk Oblast. However, it was not exactly a surprise for Ukraine. It was precisely because the Russians were planning to lure well-equipped brigades away from fighting on Ukrainian territory and into Russian territory. The Russians finally took the bait last week, after sending soldiers from Kaliningrad and Chechen TikTok fighters, famous for posing with 2 machine guns in their hands. Russia withdrew a significant part of its elite brigades from Ukraine and drove them to Kursk. The battlefield dynamics in Ukraine have not changed much in the last 2 years. If you want to seize large amounts of territory, operational surprise is the only way to do it. The first 100 hours are critical. If you miss this window, you will have to fight for every meter, go against the current, and it will cost you much more for every meter you gain. The Russian army failed to achieve any tactical breakthrough in the first 100 hours after launching its counteroffensive in Kursk. Russian military authorities ordered their troops to advance south of the Sym River by 2 routes. Russian sources reported that the 155th Marine Infantry Brigade, the 106th Airborne Division and the 56th Air Assault Regiment of the 7th Air Assault Division began attacking Ukraine's prominent western flank in the Kursk Oblast. One group of Russian soldiers successfully crossed the same river to attack from the west, while another group advanced from the north. The Russians took control of many towns and settlements along the riverbed and slightly beyond. However, all the settlements they claimed remained disputed. As the Russian counteroffensive gained momentum, a senior figure in the Russian command assumed that Ukraine's lines in the Kursk oblast were weak and it was time to force the advantage. In response, Russian forces withdrew troops from the halted Pokrovsk region and redeployed them to Kursk. Russian military officials claimed in their reports that the Russian troop strength at Kursk had increased from 10,000 to about 70,000, then to 30,000, and now back to 70,000. Russian commanders expected this number to exceed 100,000. Now, suppose you are a Ukrainian strategist. You want Russia to move its troops away from the old front lines, so you invade Kursk with enough firepower to destroy any bridge the Russians try to build across the same river. Your invasion is successful and you have full control of the river banks to the south and have trapped about 3,000 Russian soldiers. The Russians tried to cross the river but failed time and time again. Your new task is to find a way to further increase the number of Russian troops in Kursk. First of all, Ukraine allowed the Russian forces to advance. The Russian forces fell into this trap and unhesitatingly threw their troops into a battlefield full of uncertainties. This was a seriously flawed move by the Russians. Even if Russian forces managed to fully control the village of Krasnoktyabrsky and nearby settlements, it will have little impact on the final outcome. Ukraine could even withdraw from the town and let the Russians take it. In fact, Ukraine is proposed to do just that. The Russians probably believe they are clever enough to build a bridge and cross the river. The river is less than 50 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Even if Russian forces manage to build the bridge and cross, it is not known how long they will be able to hold it. If they send tens of thousands of troops and the Ukrainian army orders its air force to bomb the bridge, the situation will become even more deadlocked for the Russian military. In such a scenario, Russian forces would have to defend a narrow corridor on the other side of the river, completely dependent on a thin land passage with the river behind them and Ukrainian forces in front of them. This entire area would be under Ukrainian fire control. Under these conditions, it is almost impossible for the Kremlin to resupply the more than 10,000 Russian troops stranded on the other side of the river. The only option for the Kremlin seems to be to continue pouring more resources into maintaining the sector once they have committed to the south side of the same river. But Ukraine did not stand still after the Russians crossed the river. They violated the Russian border both from the south and from the west. The Russians fell into a trap, but they probably anticipated some of the risks involved in their strategy. We believe Russia will continue to move forward, betting that Ukraine lacks the military power to respond effectively. Their course of action also suggests that they want to push the Ukrainians back before the West fully relaxes its restrictions on the use of long-range weapons. Russia is unlikely to succeed. The reason is the long-range missiles in the Ukrainian army. There is a logic to Russia's decision to keep Ukrainian forces busy in Kursk, but the Kremlin cannot sustain this strategy for long. Western military aid to the Ukrainian army is increasing every day. Moreover, the decision to allow the use of ATACMS and Storm Shadow missiles on Russian territory signals a shift in thinking among Western leaders. It reflects a growing recognition of the need to equip Ukraine to counter Russia's advantages, even if it increases the risk of escalation. So what do you think about this issue? Let us know in the comments. Thank you for following us. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications and like to support us.